Well, hello. I'm Miriam, and today I want to talk to you about reducing accidents and illness through better welfare management. When when we're looking at common equine emergencies, it's not really a surprise that digestive issues are pretty high on the list. Common reasons are stress-induced ulcers, colic. Often we don't know the reasons, but when we do, it's due to nutritional issues, dietary changes that are too sudden. Sand ingestion happens a lot more than people might think. When we're looking at things like choke, it can be due to poor dental care, but it can also be because the horse is a very greedy eater. Then hoof issues. And hoof issues, frequently people just look at the hoof. Meanwhile, when hoof issues reoccur, it's often a systemic issue that can be connected to nutrition, that can be connected to other problems that are overlooked, that are deeper in the horse. Then we're looking at wounds. Our horses are exceptionally good at figuring out ways to get hurt. And whether it's tears, lacerations, or punctures, it can happen because their environment isn't safe. Having a broken board and a fence, a protruding nail or bolt, fighting with a herd maid, or other types of accidents that happen. A very unfortunate accident that we have in our slideshow is where an owner had a cultivator in their pasture, which I'm going, well, that was definitely not the smartest idea. When we're looking at joint and tendon issues, they tend to come from trauma a lot. Joint injuries can also come when a wound is deep and goes into the joint and the synovial fluid is impacted. And at that point, the vet will need to go in and likely surgically fix that, because if the synovial fluid gets infected, it will most likely impact the horse so badly that they will not survive. So early intervention is very important. With tendons, overworking the horse also tends to be a major contributor. When we're looking at eye issues, the environment can play a role. When horses are in a very dusty and dirty environment, it can cause irritations. But also trauma plays a role. Collapse and exhaustion issues don't happen as often, but mostly it's a concern in the summer due to electrolyte imbalances, especially when people don't look at the heat index and overwork their horses. But it can also be an environmental thing when the horses do not have enough access to shade, when the horses don't have the right environment to compensate for the heat. Fractures, thankfully not that frequent, tend to happen due to trauma, extreme trauma usually. And then we have horses getting cast or unable to get up. Mostly that happens when they're in a stall and roll against a wall, or when they roll into a fence and now they're kind of stuck there. They can't get their feet properly under themselves, or they can't even move their feet because they're somewhere in a fence. But it can also happen in a paddock when when they lay, for example, in deep snow, and now they're at an angle where they just can't move their legs properly, or they've exhausted themselves. And last but not least, reproductive and foal emergencies, although I will not get into those in this presentation. Now, how does a horse even survive in the wild is a question that we sometimes ask ourselves. But what we have to consider is that a horse in the wild lives a very different life than our domesticated horses. When we look at our domesticated horses compared to our wild horses on a genetic level and with their body composition, there is not a significant difference. Their digestive tract is essentially the same, has been the same for thousands of years. Their musculoskeletal apparatus is essentially the same. So we're looking at the same horse in two completely different environments. And horses in the wild, as long as they have the room to roam, as long as they have the resources they need, will usually live a decent life, although not the lifespan that domesticated horses that are well cared for have, due to the strain on their body with the life in the wild. It's a different lifestyle. Our domesticated horses. We're going to look at the domains of welfare here. First, we're looking at the physical environment. They tend to, these days, live in a fairly scheduled and controlled day-to-day life with stalls or run-ins. Many horses have a routine where they're either in during the day and out at night, or in during the night and out during the day. That can rotate summer to winter. Some horses will live out 24/7 with run-ins, but the majority will be on a rotation with stall and turnout. And how much turnout will vary vastly from horse to horse, from barn to barn. They usually are in flat pastures. Many of them will be rectangular, and some with grass, some without grass. And for the most part, they're worked in fairly manicured arenas or on even trails. So a nice, even, flat terrain they usually move on with limited surfaces that they're exposed to. Their behavioral interactions vary greatly from barn to barn. Some horses live in herds of 2, maybe 10, maybe more, maybe less. Some horses will barely get contact to another horse over a fence or through the bars of a stall. Horse-human interactions are often very work-focused. We come, we have a plan in mind, and that's what we're doing with the horse. And the horse has to essentially be available at that point. Enrichment is limited or not even available, and it's not really all that surprising, considering that when you go into a pet store and look at dog toys, you see a vast variety of toys. When you look at the cat toys, there's still a vast variety, but when you look at horse toys, there's very, very few, and the majority of them I cannot even recommend because they're either based on sugar-filled treats, or they are not very safe for a horse to use. Then we're looking at healthcare. Most horses get their annual checkups, possibly even 2, depending on age, and what dentals they require. They get their vaccinations, parasite control on rotation or fecal tests. They will also get their hoof care done on a regular basis. And then we're looking at nutrition. Many horses will have limited access to hay. Instead, there's a large amount of grain. Boarding barns tend to have limit on how often the horses are fed, and that's a staffing issue. Staff costs money, costs time, so it's a twice-a-day feeding schedule. Horses get fed in the morning, horses get fed in the evening. And as an owner, not everybody is able to come multiple times a day to make sure their horse gets an additional feeding. And the diets can be highly inflammatory due to lots of sugars. They can be unbalanced. The wrong fats can be in there. The fiber amounts can be wrong, and a multitude of other things. And then we're looking at the mental health and stress. And all the other elements of welfare have an impact here. The human-focused life, where the horse is always expected to be available and focused when we want them to be. And they have to travel to go to shows, to go to events, and we just have them do it. So the horse has very limited choice in many environments. Not all, but many. How does this impact health? The physical environment. Now, first of all, boredom can easily lead to stereotypies. Stereotypies like cribbing or weaving or wind sucking. Now, when we're looking at cribbing or wind sucking, they can cause digestive issues, and wind sucking also tends to cause a shift in the muscles of the neck, and that can cause imbalances for the neck and potentially cause issues with the pole. And weaving causes the horse to put a lot of strain on their tendons on their front legs and on the muscles on their front legs, although the tendons is what I'm much more concerned about. The lack of varied terrain limits biomechanical learning, because just like with us, if we're always just walking on even terrain and then all of a sudden we are asked to walk on a different terrain, now we're a little wobbly on our feet. And when we're always just walking on even terrain, that builds a specific type of muscle. We are not challenged in the way we are building our muscles. And therefore we are not fully using our capacity of biomechanical learning. And the same is true for a horse. The other part is, due to our rectangular pastures, limited turnout, our horses will move only a certain amount every day. And the thing is that when we're looking at the wild horse again, in average, they will walk about 18 miles a day. Some herds have been observed to walk up to 50 miles in a single day. Now, Eleanor Mackenzie from Hartpury University in England has done a study where she put GPS trackers on horses and collected over 5,000 hours of data with horses that were turned out between 5 and 24 hours per day. And she observed that the horses move between 2 and 5 miles per day. Now, if we're looking at that, it's not a lot. If a horse is only in their stall with a small paddock, that's even less. When I'm looking at my own horse, when she was still boarded, she was in an individual paddock with nobody except over the fence. She always stayed on that side. When there was snow on the ground, I could tell she used about a quarter of her paddock. She probably moved less than a mile every day. That limited movement means they are not exercising their muscles. There is a chance of weight gain. There is not a lot of exercise other than what you are doing with your horse. And just like with us, exercise that is done in a formal setting is different than natural movement. So when you are exercising your horse, whether it is through riding or groundwork, you are specifically training muscles as you see fit in that moment. And that's wonderful. And the better a trainer is, the better they will be able to do it. But it does not replace natural movement. And when a horse naturally moves, it also helps keeping their muscles supple, because they know how they need to move to keep themselves limber. And you do not feel what your horse feels. So it is much more difficult for you to determine what your horse needs in terms of movement than for your horse themselves. So the more movement they get throughout the day, the better it is for their own ability to move. Now, when we're looking at behavioral interactions, lack of social interactions with other horses increases stress. Lack of social interactions with other horses also creates loneliness and potentially causes problems with sleep, because horses are herd animals. When they need the herd to feel safe, they need the herd to feel at ease. And if a horse does not feel safe, they will not lay down to sleep. And if they don't lay down to sleep for at least a couple of hours every night, over time, they will start having neurological issues. A horse can go up to 7 days without laying down before neurological issues occur. Now, human-horse interactions that are focused solely on work are also stressful, because now the horse is always expecting, I have to function, I have to perform. There is never anything that is just relaxing, that is just being together. And then also, horses start getting in trouble when they have nothing to do, when they have nobody to be with. They're going to look for some sort of interaction. They're going to look for a friend. And whether that is that they're starting to make friends with the wildlife, and that could be a porcupine, or they're going to try to figure out ways to get out of their paddock. And that could be that they figure out how to open their gate. That could be that they eventually jump or break a fence. But it can also mean that they're going to start fights with their stall or paddock neighbors. Now, if they start a fight with their paddock or stall neighbor, the problem is now there's a fight, which can already cause problems when they're in the same paddock or pasture, but now there's a fence or a stall wall in between. Now, if the horse kicks through that stall wall, the foot gets stuck in there. If the foot is stuck in that stall wall, and the horse pulls it back out, now you have a degloving injury. If the horse cannot pull it back out, now the horse is stuck in there and you have to figure out how to get it. The horse may potentially be down and cast and cannot get back up. Now, if this happens in the middle of the night, you've already checked for the evening, you do not know this is happening, the horse could be down for a while. When a horse is down, you have a 4-hour window to get the horse back up before it's too late. Because after 4 hours, the horse's body cannot sustain it anymore and the intestines will shut down. So you do not want fights between horses while they're in a stall, because there's too much injury risk. And they will try to find social interactions, and they may not be positive because they haven't had a chance to interact and figure out their relationships in a safer environment. Nutrition. When the nutrition is not balanced, the first thing that I'm always concerned is the ulcer risk and choke and colic risk, because when you're looking at a horse not having access to forage or food for an extended period of time, they may run out of anything to eat. Now, a horse's stomach capacity is about 2 to 4 gallons, and they cannot get the large amounts of grain that are sometimes given, so that's already too much for them and puts them at colic risk. Now, with the ulcers, a horse will produce about 16 gallons of acid every day. They do not have a gallbladder like us that will balance out that acid. So the only thing that stems that acid is saliva. They cannot produce saliva unless they are actively chewing. and they only produce between 5 and 20 gallons of saliva per day. And I'm going with about 1,000-pound horse here for these averages. Now, if they're not chewing and the acid keeps building up, there is nothing in the stomach anymore that they're actually actively digesting. Now there's an ulcer risk. And horses develop ulcers pretty quickly, and it can take as little as 7 days from mild ulcers to get to severe ulcers. Choke can also be a pretty high risk with horses that have limited access to food because now they get greedy. They're afraid they're not going to have enough food, so they eat too fast. Systemic nutrition cost issues can happen when there's lack of nutrition. For example, lack of vitamin E can cause muscle weakness and can even impact the muscle buildup, and long term it can lead to a variety of other issues. And then a lot of people talk about the protein content in their feed, but the protein content is not as important as the amino acids that are given to the horse so they can build the proteins they actually need. So if your horse does not get enough lysine, methionine, and threonine, it doesn't matter what protein they're getting. It's just gonna come out as very expensive urine. And then when, and horses are a little bit particular about water. So if your water is too cold, if they don't have enough forage, they're going to start looking for alternative water or forage sources. And if they're looking for alternative water sources and you have, let's say, a pond or you have puddles, here in New Hampshire last year, we had major issues with blue-green algae, which is highly toxic for most species. And with alternate forage sources, if you haven't checked your paddock carefully enough, there may be a toxic plant you missed. And we always look for the big bad ones that go all over the internet as the most dangerous plants, but there is a lot of dangerous toxic plants. The ASPCA has a fantastic toxic plant list that I highly recommend looking through if you're not sure. The mental health and stress. So all of this, once again, impacts mental health and stress. We have higher risk for digestive problems. All of this impacts the immune system, and once again can cause stereotypies. Now, when the horse has high stress, it increases cortisol levels, it increases inflammation, it can cause diarrhea, which then can cause dehydration and weight loss. It can cause fatigue in the horse. It can lower the concentration. It can cause pain. It can even go as far as muscle stiffness. Now, as far as behavioral consequences are concerned, other than concentration, when the horse is stressed, it's more likely that the horse will resort to instinct behaviors, at which point the horse will just react, and that increases the injury risk because now the horse is not going to think, the horse is not going to look, they will just go, and they may just run and jump over something or run into something, and you are more likely to have wonderful things happening, like a horse that has a colic because of the stress, or a horse that has a nice laceration here because of them just kicking at something or running into something due to stress. Now, this laceration looks like it's a very, very shallow one. Thankfully, in this case, it was nothing major, but you would still need to call the vet because it's right over a joint. If this was deep, it could go into the synovial fluid, and at that point, it is serious and it could actually be life-threatening for the horse. As you may have noticed, I have not yet popped open my health slide. The reason is because if healthcare is done right, with cooperative care, the stress can be held very low, And most horse owners are already doing a fantastic job. They get the vet out for preventative health care, they do their vaccines, they do their hoof and dental care. So this is really my least concern out of all of these 5 elements. Now, in an ideal and perfect world, our horses would have all the forage they could eat with a large variety, because in the wild, horses will eat 15 to 20 different species of grass and with a couple of shrubs and other plants mixed in every single day. They would have the freedom to roam in 20, 30, 40 acres of space with lots and lots of friends they get along with. They'd feel safe all day long and have the comfort of a perfect shelter that is always just the right temperature with water that is the tastiest in the world, and have lots and lots and lots of fun. Now, realistically, that's not going to happen. We do not have the space for 40 acres for everybody, and logistically, this is not possible. But there's a lot we can do to help our horses have a better welfare protocol so we can reduce illness and injury risk. Things we can do: nutrition. Giving them 24/7 access to forage helps with their stress level, helps with their digestive balance. And the way we can do it is with slow feed nets, with giving them a putting them on some sort of track system if we have it available. So they have to actually go from hay to hay. And my experience is that when you give multiple piles of hay, they will move from bale to bale just to make sure that they're not missing the best bale of hay or the best pile of hay. And my experience is also, and I've heard that from many horse owners, that if a horse has access to hay 24/7, they will end up eating less because they don't feel like it's gonna run out. Having a locally balanced diet, you cannot assume that the supplements you buy are just going to be perfect, because the hay you're buying is going to be different. Ideally, you have your hay tested. If that is not possible, you can look for the averages for the hay in your region. And hiring a nutritionist or taking a good nutrition class will save you money in the long run, because before I learned how to properly balance my horse's diet, I wasted a lot of money because I was doubling up on certain nutrients. At the same time, I was missing other ones, and I could just not get weight on my pony, and I couldn't figure out why. So I was giving him more of several things that were supposed to help that, but nothing worked until I figured out through that new knowledge what he was actually missing. And access to clean water. Learn what your horse actually likes besides just the water temperature, because horses have preferences. The priority is having it clean, and you need to scrub it. And if your horse does not drink enough, and you may have to put like 1 scoop of Lipton iced tea in it to keep your horse drinking, that's not going to mess up their diet, because it's just a touch of flavor for them. It's not gonna make a huge difference. But have clean, fresh water that is not ice cold if you possibly can. Now, as far as the environment is concerned, you want to have space to move. And I understand that it is not possible for everybody to have a track, and it's not possible for everybody to have varied terrain. I myself am extremely fortunate that my space has a natural track, and my mare went within 3 weeks of being at my home from being boarded, of having a much better top line than I could get with 3 months of working her, just from the natural movement. The space to move, what you can do to optimize it is to spread out where everything is. Have their feed in one corner, like the hay station. Have water in a different corner, have the shelter in another corner. So they are motivated to move. And they will move a lot because they're not going to be spending the whole day eating hay. They're not going to be spending the whole day drinking water. They're not going to be spending the whole day in their shelter. And you can even space out different hay eating stations. Because as I said, a lot of horses will keep on nibbling on one and then move to another just to make sure that they're not missing the best bits. The environment obviously has to be safe and clean, and they need proper shelter from the elements. And that shelter from the elements, it doesn't have to be fancy. It just needs to be so they are protected. A 3-sided run-in is just fine. Preventative medicine, I already mentioned. And now you may be wondering why I have routine maintenance care in addition to that. Because preventative medicine, already in there, routine maintenance care, maybe the healthcare specialist and dental. Yeah, that's part of it, but there's more to it. It's you taking care of your horse on a day-to-day basis. And you taking care of your horse includes picking their feet and checking them. It includes having a daily check to see, is there anything different? But the most important part is you understanding and knowing your horse. You knowing if something is different, if something is stressing your horse, and therefore being able to adjust their environment, to adjust their nutrition, to adjust their behavioral interactions so you can prevent any stressful factors. And if there is a minor injury, that you detect it early, because horses will get tiny scrapes and scratches easily. And if you check them immediately, you can prevent more invasive and more intense medical care frequently. And routine maintenance also means taking vitals all the time. And by all the time, I don't mean daily, I mean quarterly. And to do that, you first do a baseline, and I recommend doing 10 spread out over like a month or two, and then doing an average, and then doing it about quarterly. And I can send out a form that I give out to my students so you can record it. Because if your horse has a temperature of 101, that's normal. But if your horse's normal temperature is 99, which is below normal, now the 101 is a fever. So you need to understand what a normal is for your horse. So the welfare of your horse includes understanding your horse too. And then, of course, specialized medical care as needed. Now, as far as the behavioral interactions are concerned, you need to look into environmental enrichment, which, as I said, on the market, there is not a whole lot. There's a fantastic website called Enriching Equines that I can highly recommend. But as far as enriching the environment, something as simple as a self-grooming station, just a post with a bunch of brushes secured to it, is great enrichment for the horses, because now they can just scrub against it when they're itchy. And other enrichment through interactions with each other, through potentially having some interesting things to look at. Some, like in my case, my horses love car watching. But there's a lot of food enrichment you can do just with chopped hay or with hay pellets. Once again, with the store-bought enrichment, be careful because a lot of them have high sugar contents or are not safe. And then social engagement with other horses. Human interactions, have positive human interactions. I like to call it filling the bucket in with a good balance. Imagine you have a bucket and that's all your interactions with your horse. And when you put stuff in, you're putting in the vet visit and you're putting in the deworming, and then you're putting in really hard work with your horse. Now, your horse is probably not going to be super happy if that's all that's in the bucket. But now if you add things like you just hanging out with them and giving them scritches where they're itchy, and you spending time just maybe reading a book in their pasture. Or one thing that I love to do is doing cooperative grooming, which is when I just at liberty brush my horse. The beauty of it is that she can turn however she wants to be groomed. If she wants her shoulder groomed, she will turn herself so her shoulder is in front of me. If she wants her hip groomed, she will walk forward so her hip is in front of me. If I'm brushing a little bit too hard, she will whip her head at me and just kind of nudge me a little bit. I don't know, I'm brushing a little bit too hard. If I'm brushing too soft, she just moves her hip a little bit more into me. We have worked on that communication for a while, and now we are very in tune with that, and she loves it. And eventually she will walk away because she's done. And that is something that is fully focused on her, but it gives me so much because we have that connection. And when all of those four things on top, all of is met, when then the mental state is impacted very positively, and then the work that you do, your horse will not be as stressed with and may not be stressed with at all. Your horse will enjoy being with you so much that getting on a trailer, that being caught to do work, will be a more positive experience. Now trailering is always going to be hard on your horse's body, but just having that generally lowered stress level means that your horse is primed to have a lower risk of stress, and with more locomotor input through maybe also going for walks on varied terrain, your horse will also be better able to balance out being in a trailer. Now, there's a few additional strategies I want to mention. Dietary variety and customization. This can be a little trickier if you're boarding, but if you're not, you can sometimes plant some horse-friendly plants in your paddock. What I've done is plant peppermint just outside of my paddock because it just grows like weed. So it grows into my paddock, my horses eat it down, but it keeps growing back into it. And they love it. It's good for them, but it never gets to the point that it's too much because they graze the stuff that comes into the paddock down quickly enough. And customization, you really need to look at what your individual horse needs, and you can help with a lot of issues and get ahead of them before they even become a problem. I feed all horses like they're at risk for laminitis, just to be sure that that's not going to become an issue. Herd introductions, taking them slow. If you are worried that your horses are going to fight each other and that's why you want to keep them separate, just take it slow. Make sure that your horses, when you introduce them, have an introduction where where you have two horses, you have them on a lead rope with a halter, and you just walk them around in an arena so they see each other. And then when you feel like they're both calm, then you let them go and let them figure it out, but just two at a time, not an entire herd. And then let them figure it out. Don't have a fence in between unless you feel it's absolutely necessary, because the fence can create an additional hazard. As far as herd introductions are concerned, I am not a training specialist. So you would probably want to talk to your trainer about additional tips, but just do it slowly and make sure um you're giving your horses a chance to really interact in a safe way and don't overwhelm them, because if you throw one horse in with 10 other horses, of course that's going to be a lot. Positive horse-human contact, I already spoke about that before, but when you're looking at this woman and the horse is fully focused on her. They are completely connected. That's what you want. You want that intimate connection. You want those moments with your horse where it's just about the two of you. And then looking at positive training strategies to reduce stress. I myself use positive reinforcement. Now, I'm not asking you to change your training strategies, but whatever you're using for training, look at how your horse responds to it. And when you see the stress level rising in your horse, ask yourself, what is causing the stress? Pardon me. Mm. And what can I change in this moment? And maybe the easiest is to just change what you're asking of your horse, because often the stressor is that the horse is just overwhelmed in that moment and doesn't know what is asked of them. And think about maybe taking it slower, taking one step back. And then, of course, fair horsemanship with appropriate workload. I mentioned collapse earlier. The dangers of collapse, for the most part, are horses being overworked. And if you create an environment where your horse is working themselves a lot, your horse does a lot of the training for you. So you have to actually work less to get your horse in shape than you would if your horse is pretty much standing in a stall and in a paddock using just a quarter of it all day long. But still, no matter how you keep your horse and how much they move, make sure you assess them properly and you give them only work that they are conditioned for, that they are ready for. You wouldn't run a 10K without training for it. You're going to start with maybe a little walk, run. You're not going to run 10K straight off the bat unless you have trained for it. But the most important factor in prevention is always you and your horse. It's about you knowing your horse, you communicating with your horse, and working on looking at what your horse's needs are. Because if you know what your horse needs and what your horse is lacking, then you can prevent stress. You can prevent situations where your horse will go into instinct behavior, where your horse will go into dangerous behaviors. And at that point, you're already reducing a lot of potential factors that can lead to ulcers, that can lead to colic, that can lead to behaviors where the horse may injure themselves. Well, thank you for your attention and questions.